Today we're talking about the best video camera under €1,000. Hi and welcome to this new video. I thought it would be a lovely idea to shoot a video outside. It's probably gonna bring some difficulties, but we'll see. This video is based around a budget of €1,000, so we're not really looking outside of that budget, because then it would get a lot more complicated with the new Canon R line and the Sony A7 IV and amazing cameras like that, but those are way out of our budget. Let's look at some cameras in the €1,000 category. So we could go for something like the legendary 80D, but you know, it's kind of a huge camera, so I don't want that. So instead we could go for the M50, which is basically the same camera. It does shoot 4K, but it's useless because it has a huge crop and the autofocus just doesn't work anymore. But I do actually want to be able to shoot 4K. Dus maybe we could go for the Lumix G90 from Panasonic. It does nearly tick all of the boxes. The autofocus isn't great, but I could live with that. The bigger problem for me though is that it has a really small sensor. So next up we could go for something like the xt3. This camera has great autofocus, a APS-C size sensor and a really nice and small body. But it has one little drawback, which seems kind of stupid, but it doesn't shoot 10-bit. And now you might say, you expect a camera for €1,000 to shoot 10-bit? Well, it is possible.
Meet the Fujifilm xt3.
The Fujifilm xt3 has a APS-C size sensor which can shoot 10-bit, 4K up to 30p without a crop. And it can also shoot 4K 10-bit 60p with a little tiny crop of 1.18. For the people that care about this, it can also shoot 120p in 1080p. So while filming, I mainly pair this camera up with the amazing Sigma 18-35. That is actually the lens I'm using right now. It is a range from 18 to 35 and a constant aperture of 1.8. And that in combination with the APS-C size sensor can create some good looking blurry backgrounds. So let's talk some more about the 10-bit capabilities of this camera. When I first rigged this camera out and put this little Shinobi monitor on top, I finally started using F-Log a lot more. And if you, by the way, want to know more about this rigged out version of the xt3, watch this video. The reason that I really started shooting F-Log when I attached a monitor to my camera is that I can load LUTs onto the monitor. Because F-Log looks like this, and setting exposure in F-Log is really difficult. That's why I wouldn't shoot F-Log. But now the monitor makes the image look normal. But when your F-Log footage is 8-bit and you start grading it, it's gonna fall apart because you have a smaller color range and it won't look like this. So what I started doing is shooting F-Log in 10-bit with a little monitor on top, so I can set my focus and exposure properly. And now it's pretty easy to shoot a lot better footage than I did before. Honestly, this is probably my biggest visual upgrade to, well, my content. So the most important thing the xt3 is able to do for me is create an amazing looking image. It only costs $1,000 and it can shoot 4K 60p 10-bit. I think that it's fair to say that this camera punches well above its weight. We probably got the most important stuff out of the way, but there are another few points that I would like to touch on. So first up, the lens mount. I think that this is a very versatile lens mount. You can adapt a lot of lenses to it, like this Sigma 18-35 that has actually an EF mount. I am using a Fringer adapter right now, which is pretty expensive, so that was kind of painful to buy because it just looks like a hollow piece of metal and plastic. But you can also use vintage lenses like these with a much cheaper adapter, and you can also use the Fujifilm lenses. They have a pretty amazing lineup, basically all the primes you would ever want, and also some great zooms. I do think that the Fujifilm lenses are a bit on the expensive side. And most of the prime lenses go for about €450. Some zoom lenses go for way more than that. Luckily, there are some very good third-party options, and I would like to talk about the biggest one out there, and that is Viltrox. They basically have the same prime lens selection as Fujifilm, but for about 2/3 of the price. So for instance, the 35 f1.4 from Fujifilm is about 500 bucks and the Viltrox version is about 300 bucks. So far I've only talked about the good things, but there are also some bad things. The autofocus in this camera works fine for photography, but for videography it is not reliable. So I just don't use it. And something else I dislike is the screen. The screen is fine for photography, but for videography I would have loved to see a flippy screen. And to get that flippy screen you would have to upgrade to the xt3, which will cost you 800 euros more. And at that point you might as well spend 2000 euros. One thing I certainly love about this camera is the body. It has this retro aesthetic and I really dig that. Maybe you'll say things like, well, those other cameras look more professional. If you're using a camera that does not look super complicated or high-tech, that doesn't mean that you're a bad photographer or videographer. That is just some dumb horseshit. And before we end this video, there is one more thing I would like to touch on. And that is this hateful HDMI port. I believe it's called a micro HDMI port, and these are the absolute worst connectors in the world. I've broken a few of them, I've broken many of these kind of cables, and they're just awful. I know that cinema cameras and the new Sony A7 cameras have the full HDMI ports, and in my opinion that is just the one reason you need to switch. But all of the cameras that have that kind of port are a lot more expensive. And by the way, if you don't want a Fujifilm camera, at the beginning of this video I named a few alternatives. I kind of roasted them, but they are actually pretty good cameras, all of them. I personally used the ATD, and after that I kind of confirmed the fact that DSLRs are dead, so that is the only one I really wouldn't recommend. For you guys that are stuck in the past, go ahead. But let's end this video on a positive note, and this is probably the most selfish positive note ever. If you like this video, please subscribe. So with that said, thank you for watching, and until the next time.